to all here today. Thank you so much for attending this very special day. Congratulations to all women out there. And so I'd like to first discuss the goals of my talk today, which are three. And the main goals are providing a context of Vilcabamba as a geographical and ideological site for Indigenous resistance, highlighting the female agents of this place, the little information that we know about them, but nonetheless, their importance in shaping this neo-Inca state. And finally, recasting a historical figure known to many Andeans for sure, but probably unknown by many others. Her name is Cusi Huarcay, and she was an indigenous woman of Vilcabamba who is usually perceived as a marginal and dispossessed widow, but who was a strategic political actor at the global scale. So with that, I would like to begin with, I'm sorry, before doing that, just clarifying that I am a literary scholar that usually works with historical documentation. So in order to tie up those 3 points that I wanted to share with you today, I just want to share a little bit about my my methodology, and that this methodology is one that combines a philological approach to reassess primary sources and ethnohistorical administration with that keen eye of the literary scholar. So with that, I'd like to begin with just giving you a brief context of Vilcabamba. So in 1536, a massive contingent of the indigenous resistance led by Manco Inca was defeated by the Spaniards and and their native allies, and withdrew to Vilcabamba, a mountainous region northwest of Cusco. I'd like to show you just a map so that you can have an idea of this region as I describe it. Another faction which sided with the Spaniards remained in the imperial capital, positioning themselves as natural lords. For more than 3 decades, the Vilcabamba faction caused panic among colonial authorities, both secular and religious, as several attempts failed to bring them under Spanish control. The Spaniards had first negotiated with Manco Inca until he was assassinated in 1544. After that, his sons Sari Tupac, Tito Cusi, and Tupac Amaru positioned themselves as Spain's Inca clients. In 1557, a signed peace treaty stipulated the submission of Sari Tupac and his pregnant wife, Cusi Huarcay, to the colonial regime in exchange of categorical pardon, as well as the riches encomiendas in Peru. And here I have an image by Guaman Poma de Ayala of the couple getting married in Cusco. So at the time that Cusi Huarcay and Sari Tupac left Vilcabamba to establish themselves in Yucay, nothing went as smoothly as they had planned. Shortly after they left Vilcabamba, Sari Tupac died in circumstances that bred rumors of assassination. The encomienda titles passed to their daughter, Doña Beatriz, but she was a minor. Thus, her guardianship and the management of her estate were entrusted to others. For the next 5 years after Sari Tupac's death, the raids and attacks continued under the leadership of Tito Cusi. Other viceroys came and went, and finally in 1565, a peace plan was devised without Cusi Huarcay's knowledge. Tito Cusi's son, Quispetito, would marry Doña Beatriz. They were first cousins, so the marriage would require papal dispensation. Still minors, the couple would entrust their magnificent state administration to Tito Cusi. He would also receive 2 more encomiendas for his personal use, retain his regal status, and obtain political pardon and legal protection. All these agreements had been drafted in a written document, but before achieving peace, the royal court had to ratify them. No one had expected Cusi Huarcay would impede these intricate political plans. Yet she did. One night, She went to the convent where her child was guarded, took her and placed her in the home of a wealthy Spanish encomendero, Arias Maldonado, whom he considered a father and a brother. Some months later, she consented to a marriage between Beatriz and Arias's brother. The couple was allegedly married in the presence of several prominent citizens of Cusco. This marriage had several implications. For one thing, it obstructed the Spanish peace negotiations with Vilcabamba. The Spanish governor, Lope Garcia de Castro, also feared that this union would undermine any other authority. Soon after this, the alleged wedlock was deemed illegal under several grounds. The Maldonados were exiled to Spain, the child was returned to the convent, and Philip II continued seeking dispensation to marry the girl to Tito Cusi's son. By the time all this was granted, it was too late. Tito Cusi was dead, and the Spaniards had gone to war against the next Vilcabamba leader, Tupac Amaru, whom they captured and killed in 1572. Now, all this narrative that I just recounted to you is the known history of Vilcabamba, seen from outside. What transpired within this neo-Inca state is largely unknown. But more recently, the work of archaeologists working with an array of colonial sources has provided new insights into this kingdom in exile. I read this published primary sources against the fragmented information I found in colonial chronicles, official reports, notarial records, and other court cases to partially reconstruct a Vilcabamba historiography that includes its female actors. And I want to show you the image of Vilcabamba as a region, because when looking for the female population of Vilcabamba, we have to realize that when Manco Inca left to take refuge there, he was accompanied by several men and women. Many of these women specifically were of Inca ancestry, while many came from other ethnic groups, such as Catalina Taipichisque, Cusihuarcai's mother, who was from the Aymara nation of the Condesúyo, and who, in the words of some of the witnesses, was brought to Manco Inca because of her beauty. She was, in fact, one of Manco's several wives, as the Vilcabamba Incas continued practicing polygamy, but likely in a modified fashion. Now, given the fragmented nature of the sources at hand, my interpretation of these practices is speculative. But the example of Tito Cusi's wives is revealing. So let's focus on them. Tito Cusi, the eldest son of Manco's children, is said to have had at least 7 wives. And judging by their names, some came from the Quito kingdom, some were possibly Cañari women, others came from the jungle, and at least one of them may have come from the Cusco region. So you can see the map there and try to identify some of those places where all these women are coming to Vilcabamba. 2 of his more visible wives were baptized as Angelina. Angelina Polanquilaco is one, and she was probably coming to Vilcabamba from the Cusco region. And the other one was Angelina Yaxachumbi, who was probably coming from Cusco. Their portrayals emerge in the accounts of the death of Fray Diego de Ortiz, an Augustinian friar who was indoctrinating in Vilcabamba and was killed by the natives. Now, the images of these 2 women are rather interesting because they emerge later, after the process for the canonization of Fray Diego de Ortiz comes to a being. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment here. And I just want to point out a couple of things. The portrayals of Angelina Yaxachumbi and Angelina Polanquilaco, as I said, come from these accounts that are later put together to seek the canonization of Friar Ortiz. The main accusation is given to Angelina Polanquilaco as the mastermind of Friar Ortiz's death. And so the events happen around 1568. So the narrative of this event is that Tito Cusi had gone to Puquiura because he had heard the news that the friars had desecrated a nearby shrine, and he expelled them from the site, but Ortiz remained around Vilcabamba. Sometime after that, Tito Cusi and others gathered at Vitcos, another region that was nearby, to remember Manco Inca's death. There was a banquet, and allegedly he drank too much wine and chicha until he became ill. Ortiz and Pando, his secretary, were called to see him, but Tito Cusi died the next morning. At this point, the two men were accused of having poisoned the Inca. And according to the accounts, it was Angelina Polanquilaco that commanded that the priest should be killed. Now, this accusation of Polanquilaco as the mastermind of Friar Ortiz's death was apparently devised by Angelina Llacsachumbi. In her 1595 deposition, which comes later, she provides one of the most detailed accounts of Tito Cusi's death and even the symptoms prior to his passing. She said that he died with a swollen tongue and mouth, coughing up clotted blood, and she and the other natives suspected the Inca had been poisoned with soliman, which is liquid mercury. Immediately after that, she said that Angelina Polanquilaco cried out, blaming Fray Diego de Ortiz and Pando, and she ordered them to be killed. But why would she be interested in Polanquilaco's demise at this time? So one of the testimonies of another witness of this case gives us a hint. In the words of Juan Hualpa, Polanquilaco was, and I quote him, the most beloved wives of Tito Cusi, end of quote. Under the previous order, the logical preference should have been given to the Cusco woman, but this example suggests the importance of the wives changed in the neo-Inca state. While plain jealousy may have played a role here, we should consider other reasons as well, and we should also consider that these accounts are taken after these events have passed. So in order to summarize all these events that are happening, I think another question should be considered at this point, and that question is, who would have been interested in having Tito Cusi killed? Gathering all the sources that we have, we probably can say that Polanquilaco was possibly unfairly accused of Ortiz's death, but that will remain a mystery. But what we can try to see is who else would have been interested in his death. Let's then talk about what we know. As the Vilcabamba literature suggests, many question the legitimacy of Tito Cusi's rule in Vilcabamba. So he had many detractors. But one individual had continuously felt betrayed by him and had suffered the disenfranchisement of the Spanish authorities at the same time. That individual was none other than Cusi Huarcay. When Sari Tupac left their kingdom in exile, they did so thinking they would play a role in Spanish indigenous politics. But soon after, they realized Tito Cusi's diplomatic game. They were only buying him time. When Tito Cusi devised the plan of marrying his son to Cusi Huarcay's daughter, he did so without consulting her. Besides, this marriage was convenient for him alone. This explains why she impeded the intricate political plans between Spanish officials and the Vilcabamba Incas. Now, let's try to understand a little bit of Cusi Huarcay's life in Cusco prior to these events. She had been living there for about a decade by the time of these negotiations, and she was well connected. She was connected to important mestizos, former conquistadors, legal advocates, and some of Vilcabamba natives. In 1567, she filed a judicial inquiry to denounce the Spanish neglect of her rights on Información ad Perpetuum, where she communicated an important message to the Spanish authorities. Either she received the financial restitution promised to her and her husband, or Tito Cusi would not come out in peace. Although this warning was significant, the Spanish governor's solution was to ignore it. But little did he know that Cusihuarcai's actions were politically consequential, as they influenced maneuvers within and between Vilcabamba and Cusco. Tito Cusi's death was, in a way, a fulfillment of this warning. Cusihuarcai had confronted the Spanish authorities in different occasions. And when the next viceroy, Viceroy Francisco de Toledo, arrived with the mission of destroying the Vilcabamba Incas, she had no choice than challenging his authority. Her resistance to his authoritarianism was met with cruel revenge. Just to make a list of the times when she confronted Viceroy Toledo, we have that in 1570, he dispossessed her from some ancestral lands at the hands of a Spanish encomendero. In 1571, the viceroy forced her into marrying an obscure man, someone who in years prior had been accused of lying about his quote-unquote service to the Spanish crown. That same year, 1571, he approved a genealogical representation that excluded Cusihuarcai from the Inca aristocracy. And as this were not enough, in the campaign against the Vilcabamba Incas in 1572, Toledo arranged the marriage of her daughter to the man that led the chain to Pacamaru to his death in the Cusco Square. Viceroy Toledo may have thought that by having this woman married to his chosen men, he could just flip the page on them and undercut their political and economic autonomy. Still, the willful omission of this woman's importance, particularly Cusihuarcai, would have a little recognized effect on his governance, which I explain in the next section. So let's focus now on the relationship of Cusihuarcai and Toledo. So after dismantling the Vilcabamba stronghold, Toledo embarked on his next mission to revive the depleted mines of Potosí discovered in 1545 and to find new ones. He was convinced that the natives were hiding numerous ancient mines and treasures, quote unquote, by the devil's orders. But he was also confident that he could take over some to yield the necessary profits. Soon after, the mines of Huancavelica became the most important site for mercury production to be used in refining silver and supply the demands of Potosí and even the Mexican miners' demands by 1602. As Toledo fixed his eyes on other distant mining districts, Cusco became his laboratory to test secret mining amalgamation techniques proposed by fortune-seeking Spaniards and their indigenous collaborators. Although Cusco was never regarded as a mining center, Vilcabamba had several reservoirs of mercury, gold, and silver ores. Prior to Tito Cusi's death, a Spanish miner petitioned the Inca to allow him to hunt for gold. He was successful in both obtaining permission and in finding significant quantities of the precious metals. The Inca knew that should word of this reach other Spaniards, he would never be able to prevent an invasion and had Romero killed immediately. This is the miner. Now, this story suggests that Tito Cusi was unaware of these mines and only became aware when this miner incursion. Because of the internal political conflicts within Vilcabamba at the time, it is likely that some of these mines were only known to a few of its leaders. As it turns out, Cusihuarcai was not only knew about these mines firsthand, but she owned several of them. In the later 1570s, she decided to reveal a couple of them to Toledo's appointed governor of Vilcabamba, Don Martín Hurtado de Arbieto. Years later, she declares she even sent her female servant, the one who had cared for these mines since the time of her ancestors, to show him the place. In fact, these mines have been cared for, the fact that these mines have been cared for by a male servant and owned by a native noblewoman, a Koya, supports the argument about the symbolic connection between metallurgy and women. It also supports the theory that she ordered Tito Cusi's mercury poisoning because he was interfering with her economic and political rights. But why would Cusihuarca reveal those mines to Hurtado de Arbieto at this time? Piecing together related documents, we can see that it's likely that she was either seeking to distance Arbieto from Toledo, or that she was simply looking for some personal gain. She attained the first goal. Hurtado de Arbieto began exploring the potential of these mines without reporting them to Toledo. In fact, Toledo left Peru without knowing anything about them. The next viceroy governed only with a couple of years before he died, and then Don Fernando Torres y Portugal, also known as Conde del Villar, was appointed his successor. Del Villar had little time to get acquainted with Peru before he had to face unrest on a global scale. In the early 1580s, the war between Spain and England demanded all the wealth the Spanish-American territories could provide for them. As the sources of this period suggest, Cusihuarca was aware of the unfolding religious and political tensions within Europe, which had a clear impact at the local level. In the late 1570s, she had revealed the locations of two of her mines without receiving any personal benefit, but she owned at least another dozen additional mines, and she was ready to negotiate their value with the new viceroy. So between 1586 and 1587, she addressed several letters to the Conde del Villar, offering to reveal the location of her silver mines and gold and also mercury mines to help Spain against its fight with the, and I quote her here, the Lutherans that go against the divine will. But she did so with some conditions. She would have to lead the way in the disclosure of these mines, but her cousin, a mestizo, Jorge Fernandez de Mesa, would go along in the hopes of becoming the overseer of the native laborers. Luis de Quesada, her personal notary and a Spanish mining expert, would go as well. And important about Quesada is that he had been the one that introduced to the Andes the technique for extracting silver from its ore with liquid mercury, for which he was awarded an official title in Cusco. And it's important to note that she also considered him, quote unquote, her father. In essence, she had crafted a detailed plan for this expedition and the subsequent exploitation of the mines. Logically, she was also expecting something in return. Now, let us consider the possibility and significance of Cusihuarca's mine ownership. In the pre-Hispanic Inca tradition, mines and mineral veins were often huacas, that is, in the enshrines of sacredness, and they were perceived as maternal wombs. The 16th century Spanish chronicler Bernabé Cobo reports that these mineral repositories were called coya, the same word that we use to refer to Inca elite women or any other elite women. The seldom noted association of the word coya with mine ownership resonates with Cusihuarca's own identity as a noblewoman and as a former spouse of an Inca ruler. 6 of the 12 mines listed by her were mercury mines, which the scribe noted as azogue, also known as Soliman. According to the mestizo chronicler, Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, the liquid matter of mercury was perceived by the Indians as harmful because they had seen that it caused tremors and loss of consciousness. Well, it is uncertain, if she had worked the mines herself. We know that her returners that care for them knew the exact location. So, as I was saying, her interest in sharing this information was likely prompted by her awareness of a globalized world. The mines she had effectively hid from various Spanish officials, particularly Toledo, and even her loaded, now deceased, second husband, had the potential to place her in good standing in this connected and far-reaching world. But still, the Conde del Villar was hesitant about her request. He was very slow to reply to her letters and expressing that he would rather negotiate the finding of these mines with Fernandez de Mesa, her cousin, and not with her, to which she objected. And she argues that although she is a woman and a lonely widow, that she knew how to get to those mines, and she was the only one that could do it. She also informed the viceroy that years before she disclosed some mines to Hurtado de Arbieto, which he exploited. The viceroy reevaluated this information, but rather than tasking her advice, he mounted an investigation of Hurtado de Arbieto's term as governor. And he confirmed that the governor had been exploiting two mines, which the natives call Huamani and Huaynahuarco. And I'll show you a map with the location of this mines. Let's see. Okay, so the ones that are circled here are the two mines that Hurtado de Arbieto had been exploiting without Toledo's knowledge, and also without paying the royal fifth. But nonetheless, in spite of all this information, the Conde del Villar would not accept Cusihuarcai's offer. By 1590, Cusihuarcai was dead, and the location of her mines, the other mines remained forever hidden. The list that she provided to the viceroy is an interesting document, which I explore now briefly, because it was apparently a coded map to locate the rest of the mines based on a combination of geographical markers, toponyms, and other signs. An attempt to decodify the information she left in the record suggests that only someone fully acquainted with the geography of the place and fluent in the various native languages of the region, such as Quechua, Puquina, and other languages from the jungle, as well as having knowledge of Andean and Inca traditions and beliefs, would be able to understand the topographic references and semantics of these words to find these mines, in spite of the misspellings of the notary. So let us consider one example. The mountain called Huaynahuarco, which is, I think, in the red circle in the map, it comes from the Quechua compound terms Huayna and Huarco. Huayna is translated as new worth or new value, and which was located near another mine called Huamani, which is literally depicted as the place where the bird Huaman or falcon poses. Now, these references are the ones that are noting the demarcation of a Suyu as well. So some of the other mines, the names of the other mines whose meanings are difficult to accurately interpret because we lack the context and the several terms that appear to designate the mines, but some of them may have referred to the quality of metals. Take, for example, one of the mines that she called, the name was Sampalla, which is Quechua for lightweight, or another one that is Wani, which is Aymara for a pile of rocks. So this, some of the references that are only Cusihuarcay, along with her companions, would have used to locate these mines at the Spanish officials, let her lead the way. So by partially revealing the locations of these mines to the Conde del Villar, Cusihuarcay certainly expected something in return. But when he decided to ignore her, she also avoided the appropriation of these mines. In other words, she neither gained nor lost. Access to the Vilcabamba mines were, in fact, the road less taken. So as a way to conclude, I'd like to say that the available information about the women of Vilcabamba not only allows us a more inclusive history of this place, but also help us establish new connections. These connections are the product of a critical position and a particular method. That is the method that reads all the available colonial texts that have any indigenous words with a keen eye. These are some of the textual clues which many historians find curious but rarely pursue. In the case of the documentation at hand, my concern is to examine the multiple meanings of indigenous words within Spanish documents as a significance, because of the significance that these words provide and the nuanced readings that they give. Now, regarding Cusihuarcay's case, I hope I was able to show that she was an important political actor. The unexplored facets of her life reveal her decisive role in Inca Spanish politics, as well as the unknown histories of commerce and mining exploitation on a global scale. But they also point out on how elite individuals made choices about whether to support the colonial state. At the end, we're left wondering what would have happened if she would have revealed the location of the other mines and whether those mines were in fact viable for the Spanish. Cusihuarcay's case is certainly an example of a road note taken, and historically, the product of intriguing disconnections in global history. And with that, I think I would like to leave it there for the comments. I will stop sharing now.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was really fascinating and timely too, this being International Women's Day. Not only did we get some of the poorly known gendered aspects of history in this period, but also some really fascinating intersections of gender, ethnicity and class, and some hidden treasure as well. So, all really fascinating. And I'll hand over now to Kaya to respond to that talk. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Sara, for a really fascinating talk that draws on your really innovative research on Inca and Indigenous women. I was really excited to hear more, to finally get a chance to hear more about your work. And I'll try to keep my comments as brief as possible to allow the maximum amount of time for questions. So in your talk, you rightly highlight the active political and religious roles that women played in Vilcabamba, in contrast to how they're presented in the historiography as passive or even absent, and where most attention is focused on the male leaders of Vilcabamba. Your research sheds much needed light on the prominent roles held by Indigenous and here Inca women in the 16th century by showing not only how their status was undermined by Spanish institutions, legal norms, or patterns of inheritance, but also how they strove to maintain their authority and status and economic interests in ways that the archival sources, structured according to Spanish legal norms, often erase. So I was wondering if you could sort of maybe start out by talking a little bit more about that broader context, the broader and changing relationships between the Vilcabamba and Cusco Incas. Do you see them as having diverging or converging interests? And where do the women who you're focused on fit into the interests of the Incas at both Cusco and Vilcabamba? Some historians, such as Franklin Peace, have suggested the possibility that there remained a dual structure with two Incas, and that they sort of did this strategically with Manco Inca leading the resistance at Vilcabamba, where Baguio, Inca, and others maintained a more collaborationist approach, remaining in close proximity to the Spaniards in Cusco. And in another article that you've written recently, you mentioned Cusihuarca as possibly being sort of a spy in Cusco at one point. So sort of thinking about what you see her role and the role of other women in this context. So as I was saying, your work promises to shed much needed light on how Inca women fit into these changing political dynamics, especially as many may have flown under the radar of Spaniards, but their actions would have been perceived and understood by Andeans. At what point do you see dual structures of role as having broken down in Vilcabamba? If they did exist and hadn't been undermined at an earlier point, with the emergence of factions among the Inca elite? Was it with the arrival of Sairi Tupac and Cusihuarca in Cusco, with the death of Titu Cusi Yupanqui, or at some other moment? So that's sort of my first very general question. And then I was really excited, your discussion of the association between Coya and mine ownership, mineral veins as huacas, gives us a lot to think about, especially in the context of female religious authority and how it intersects with their political interests. So are you, as part of your broader project, also hoping to try to reconstruct the religious authority that Indigenous women tried to maintain within their communities and their colonial role? Do you see strategies emerging to try to maintain their authority through religious roles, even as these were being undermined by extirpators, priests, or missionaries? Do the accusations linking Angelina Polanquilaco with the order to execute Friar Ortiz perhaps also reveal religious tensions about female spiritual authority within sort of Vilcabamba and afterwards? And finally, I really like your close attention to linguistic details and naming in the sources, specifically the words that appear in Quechua, Aymara, and Puquina. So can you say a bit more about what the use of these three languages in the documents can tell us about the broader context in which the women were operating? Here, I'm also noting another silence that your work is addressing by taking a philological approach to the sources, by questioning our assumptions, not only about the absence of Indigenous women in positions of leadership and power in 16th century society, but also our assumptions that Vilcabamba was a site defined narrowly in relation to the Cusco Incas, and ignoring the role of its Aymara members, and especially Aymara and other women who married into the Inca lineages. So I think I'll leave my three comments there if you want to respond or not, and it's up to you, and then we'll open the floor to questions. So again, thank you so much for a really fascinating talk.
Thank you, Caroline. I think you have given me so much for food for thought, and I think I'm able to address some of your comments, and some I'm still working on them. And I am familiar with Franklin Peace's argument about a dual structure between Vilcabamba and Cusco, but in looking at the available sources, which for me, working with Indigenous women are very hard to find. Mostly, I try to lean on the interesting information that emerges from many of the mestizo children of some of the noble Indigenous females that are available. And in looking on the sources, I think we all know, especially Andeanists, know the known peace negotiations that happened when Sairi Tupac left Vilcabamba, for example, and he was, I think, housed and even persuaded by one of his aunts, another Indigenous woman whose name resonates. I think it's Beatriz Coya. And what I found out through my work is that Beatriz Coya was taking hostage two Indigenous women who apparently were the daughters of Manco Inca. And because we don't know much about this woman other than possibly their names, we're left wondering, you know, to what degree the fact that she was housing or providing a home, if we want to say that, to this woman also helped in convincing the Incas to leave Vilcabamba at that point. So in that sense, I would contend with the idea of a dual structure working in Vilcabamba and Cusco, because I think this dual structure only has focus on the male key players of these two places. But when we focus on the females, I think there are newer tensions that arise and that are more eye-opening to something else is going on in Vilcabamba, and the interests of the Incas of Cusco are basically very different from the ones from Vilcabamba. Now, in what we know about Vilcabamba, I think the literature on Vilcabamba itself as a site of resistance agrees that that it is a site of cultural hybridity. And what we're seeing with the examples of the several wives of Tito Cusi, but especially Angelina Polanquilaco and Angelina Llaxachumbi, is that there was a new order there, right? And I really like and appreciate your comment about focusing on the religious significance of this woman. More information would be needed, of course, to see what other things happened to them after Vilcabamba was seized by the Spaniards, because after that, several of the members were exiled to Lima and Huamanga. But interestingly, the two women, the two Angelinas, and several other natives were exiled into a nearby town. And if I show the map really, really fast so you can see it, they were not sent too far when they were expelled from Vilcabamba. They were sent to this town. It's called Lucma, and we can see it has a church too. And this is the new town of Vilcabamba that was founded after the Neo Inca state in the original place was dispersed. But the reason why we know of this woman is because they were they stayed nearby and they were called to testify against each other. And as far as that, I think we can probably try to get more information about the remaining population, native population that stayed in that place. And finally, I have written elsewhere about Cusihuarca in the past few years, and every time I write something about her, it's something new because it's something that I hadn't noticed before. And so in a previous publication, I think I consider her a spy in Cusco because it is known, and she even tells us about this in that main document that we have about her, the Información ad Perpetuum, that she had been in contact with many natives in Vilcabamba. And but what is important in this new vision of Cusihuarca is that she was well aware of what was going on in Cusco. In one of the longest trials, and she was part of the trial to decide about the legality of her daughter, Beatriz Clara Coya, to Cristobal Maldonado. She states herself that Doña Beatriz Coya, the aunt that I was telling you about, that supposedly convinced Sari Tupac to leave Vilcabamba and accept the Spanish terms, she considered her mortal enemy. She doesn't say why, but I think all this piecing together this information about the importance of this woman, their biases and their alliances opens up new doors of interpretation. And with that, I think we still need to find some other clues to write that more inclusive history that probably will change some of the frameworks that we already have established in Indian history, for example. And finally, your comments on the linguistic aspect about as a way of analysis. I really find fascinating this new aspect of paying attention to this very maybe small textual details, but in looking for the meaning of the Vilcabamba name itself, I found out that just looking through the dictionaries of the period and some other cultural references, that Vilcabamba probably, that's the Spanish spelling, but possibly the native spelling was Wilca Pampa. And Wilca is an Aymara word that is referred to the sun, which in the Quechua Cusco is Inti. And so this reference to a preference for Aymara terms rather than Quechua terms is also very interesting to examine. Several of the mines that Cusihuarcay listed, which are about 12, also give some clues to Aymara and Puquina origins. So with that, I think I will continue exploring this aspect in other documents that I see, but I also want to leave some time for other questions if there are many. Thank you very much for your comments.
Oh, and thank you so much. This is, really exciting to hear more about your research. So.
Thanks very much, Kaya and Sarah, for addressing those points. There's 2 questions in the chat. I think, Liliana, you had your hand up, but you've put your question in the chat. So would you like to say it in person? You can unmute yourself.
Hi. Yeah, I will try to say that in person. Sorry for my terrible English. First of all, I want to felicitar, congratulations for your excellent presentation. And I think that your approach to the documents is super useful and very interesting because historians and historians usually don't take so much attention to the literacy of the documents. So I think that it allows you to read underlines, entre líneas, about the actions of these women. And also I have two questions. Several historians said that Tito Cusi died because he was ill, pneumonia or something like that. Do you think that it would change the role of Cusihuarcay anyway in that case? And also my second question is about Toledo. Do you think that the enfrentamiento, the animadversión that he has against La Colla Cusihuarcay, the problems they would have, is because of the kinship, los lazos parentelares, the relation, the network of La Colla Cusihuarcay, or just because of Toledo general program of reform of the Andean territory to cut the power of the Incas in the Cusco? Just that. Thank you very much again. And also, as I said in the chat, I think that it would be very useful in your research to highlight the knowledge of these women as you show us, and also with previous research that you have made of the conocimiento, the knowledge that they have of the complicated bureaucracy system just to litigate, and also para solicitar mercedes of the grants system. Thank you very much. It was so fascinating to hear you, and congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liliana, for these wonderful questions. As far as the first one about Tito Cusi's death, yeah, I think some chroniclers, I can't remember specifically which one is the one that names pneumonia as one of the cause, but I think the underlining narratives about his death relate with some kind of pulmonar issue, and in that sense, when I was when I was reading the accusations of Angelina Polanquilaco, it was interesting to see how this other Angelina Liaxatumbi, is the one that gives so much detail about Tito Cusi's death, and she even states she was there next to him, and she saw what happened, and she described with so much detail the symptoms that I think we should consider that, right, as an interesting fact, and also the fact that it was known among Andeans that mercury was poisonous, and I think all that just. All this is historical speculation. we probably won't know exactly.
Yeah, but it sounds like poisoning. Yeah, I think so.
It does sound like he was poisoned, that his lungs were affected.
Yeah, Soliman was so popular. Yeah.
Right. And as I was researching medical causes for mercury poisoning, I think all relate to pulmonary issues. So we could say maybe he was indeed poisoned, and maybe it was someone who wanted to take revenge of him, and that's why I make the connections between Cusi Huarcay as a mine owner, as someone who had issues right against him, and as the possible mastermind. So another woman is being blamed, but maybe we should also consider Cusi Huarcay. And the other question you had is one that I've been asking myself all the time. Why is Toledo so much against Cusi Huarcay? And one thing that I suggest in my interpretation of this is that he was against of what Incas had practiced, and he believed that that he really believed that they were tyrants, and that they didn't have any legal rights to rule. So Cusi Huarcay, if you think about her, she was the very impersonation of the things that he detested about the Incas. He talked about royal incest. She was married to her half brother, and just the fact that she was very vocal about the decisions that he took in his rule in the Andes. I think all that built up so that I think we can see it from our perspective, and we can see a pile of events that make this relationship between Toledo and Cusi Huarcay one that is very unbearable. But there's still something to consider, and I'm still trying to have that question in my mind. Why else would he want to go against this woman? Thanks.
Thank you, Sara. I'm going to read out two questions now from Milton in the chat. The first one, after thanking you for your presentation, says, could you elaborate on Maria Cusi Huarcay's relationship with Tito Cusi Yapanqui? Did she collaborate or plot against the Vilcabamba Incas? Why? And the second one is also, have you considered that Coya Queen and Coya Mine were two different words with different pronunciations for Quechua speakers? What is the relation between Queen and Mine? Okay,
thank you for the questions. Well, the relationship between Tito Cusi and Cusi Huarcay, I think it's a relationship that starts complicating itself as they progress. I think, as I mentioned in the essay, in the paper, at first she was willing to negotiate with the Spanish authorities because she thought that by accepting the terms, she and Sairi Tupac would have been entitled to some ancestral lands that were very desirable by other natives native elites in or around Cusco. But when all the events happened the way they did, I think she realized that Tito Cusi was also looking just for his own interest. And that's why I think the relationship between this two is complicated. As I said, one of the main plans of Tito Cusi was to marry his son, Quispetito, with Cusihuarcai's daughter, Beatriz Clara Coya. But none of that was going to be of any benefit to her. And I think all that is something that complicates the relationship to the point that if she did, in fact, was the mastermind of his death, I think it was done for all those reasons. And again, this is just a historical speculation based on the sources that we have. And about the question about the spelling of Coya, yes, it's correct. I think it depends on the source that you consult. I've been trying to consult many sources on the different spellings of Coya with a C and Coya with a QH. But at the end, I think the association between mining and women becomes with the biological reasons of a woman that is also a mother. So in this case, the mine refers to a womb, and in that association, that is related to the importance of noble females in the Andean tradition. So that is about the associations that I come up with when I talk about mining and women.
Thank you very much, Sara. I'm going to read out another question now that's in the chat from Nicole, which says, oh, sorry, it's just scrolled down. Wonderful to hear your talk about this important research. A question about the informaciones given at Cusihuarcai's behest in 1567. There, both Spanish and Inca witnesses attest that she is very generous with the Indians of Vilcabamba. How do you understand her generosity?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question, because I think the way I understand that question is because for all that we know about elite women in the Andes, they had to display generosity against their subjects. And Cusihuarcai was unable to do that, even though she wanted to do that, because she filed this information so that she could access some of the financial benefits that she thought she deserved. And one of the reasons that she gives in this document is that she wants to show generosity to the people that visit her. And with that, and with that sense, I think that we have to consider that's part of the tradition of being a noble Andean female. And that is something that continues in the 18th century even. When I was working on an 18th century cacica, for example, one of the main complaints of the natives was that she was not generous to them, that she didn't vet them, that she didn't give them clothes, that she didn't provide for them as a mother would. And so the perception that a noble Andean woman has to be generous and provide for their subjects, I think it's very present. I think that was something that Cusihuarcai wanted to do at the time, and I think that was, that would have show to the native population that she was still a powerful indigenous woman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to abuse the chair's position, and if that's all right, and ask a question. And it's two questions which are linked, and the answer to the second question may negate the need to answer the first question. So as a Mexicanist and as I'm afraid, very underinformed modernist about this period, if you see what I mean, I've been reading some of the more recent historiography on the post-conquest, or the conquest and the post-conquest period in Mexico, particularly things that are shifting the weight of scholarly and popular history, like Matthew Restall and Camilla Townsend's work. And for me, with my superficial knowledge, it seems like there's a lot of commonalities here in thinking about how we might challenge the preconceptions about power, class, ethnicity, gender, and so on. So the first question is, do you see those kinds of commonalities? But the second question is there any point in looking for them? Because is to do so, very reductive in looking at a kind of blanket structure of pre-conquest societies into very distant, complex societies.
Wow, that's a very interesting question. And I must speak by my by my informed, only informed knowledge about pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. I think looking for commonality methodologically is important, because I think we could use some of the knowledge and assumptions that we know and that are probably more available for Mesoamerica than are for the Andes. And in that sense, I think the work of Matthew Restall has been very influential to me, because he talks about how Mexicanists and scholars that work in early Mexico, working with gender specifically or other topics, are more able to underline or pay attention to indigenous voices, because there are massive amounts of documentation that could tell us firsthand what indigenous people were thinking and were doing, and how were they talking about the past in their own words and using their own alphabetically now written language, which is something that doesn't happen in the Andes. In the Andes, we only have a few documents that we could consider that have been written in the actual native languages by colonial authors or under the supervision of colonial authors. But more recently, I think there is a tendency, which I applaud, of Andeanist scholars to start focusing on those minor aspects of native agency that emerge, even if the documents are written in Spanish. So with that, I would like to say, yes, I think commonalities are good, or could be good methodologically speaking. Obviously, these are societies that are very different in structure, but I think when commonalities emerge, I think it's just very enlightening, if especially if we don't have as many sources as we would want produced by natives themselves. So, but thanks for the idea. Yes.
That was good. It wasn't just a flat no to the second question. So. Great. And I think if anyone else has another question, we have a few more minutes. Raise your hand or add the question in the chat. I'll just give you an opportunity to do that if you have anything more you want to ask, Sara.
No, I think I'm really very grateful to have been given the chance to present my research. I just want to say that this is a research in progress, because I've been working on a book on indigenous women, which my initial focus was going to be the Incas, but as I read more and write more, I think it's just not a matter of Incas and non-Incas. I think we need to see a bigger picture here to let the female agents emerge more freely. So thank you again for this invitation, and thank you for inviting me to say.
And what better way could there be to finish the talk today? So thank you very much. And I'd ask everybody to unmute and to thank Sara in the traditional way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
We'll stop recording now.